Hi,
Hi.
welcome back to another episode of Analyze Scripts. Whew, warning, this is going to be a doozy. We are covering a pretty heavy
Mm,
documentary that recently came out on Netflix called The Program, um, Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping, to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Whew, I believe it's 3 parts,
yeah.
and it was filmed, kind of through the lens of adults who lived through the troubled teen industry, specifically Catherine Kubler, who we've reached out to on Instagram, and we would love to connect with if she's listening or if anyone can get this to her. I am just astounded by, not just her bravery, but a lot of the bravery of all of the other people involved. In sort of coming forward about their experience and putting words to trauma
Mhm.
in such an impactful and meaningful way. And I just really hope they had like help putting this together or like therapists around or someone to like debrief with them. Because I can't imagine what it was like to go back to this school and like be back in that
No,
environment.
I can't imagine that, and we see, one of the people in the documentary, like, so at times when he's talking about being in that room and, like, kind of having to
Yeah.
stare at this one, like, piece on the wall, and you see
Oh,
him get really activated, which
it's
yeah,
like a
like
trauma reaction. Yeah.
and, I think it's powerful that she says, "You can leave." Like, just,
Oh,
like and he, like, kind of needed to hear that. I feel
yeah.
like probably was dissociating flashbacks, all of the trauma
100%.
symptoms where it's like all of a sudden he's back in that experience where he can't, and it's like, "No, you can.
Right.
Like, let's leave
Right.
this room. Let's kind of take a break." It's just I thought
I
that was so
know.
powerful. So, yeah, I mean,
I
this
did too.
watching this documentary, it took me a couple of days. I feel like I
Me
really
too.
absorbed it. Like, I was trying to be really thoughtful watching it. I was very moved. I was very emotional
Mhm.
watching it.
Mhm.
Interestingly, I had heard of like kind of the transportation
Mhm.
gooning, as they kind of had referenced it in the documentary, when I worked at a residential that was, I would say, better for teens, and
It was
they were
like
kind of
accredited and legitimate,
yeah.
you mean?
And
Yeah.
some of the staff, I remember though, now I'm like, "Ooh," were kind of like almost talking about like, "Oh, you think that this is bad, like, at least you're
Mm.
not at programs where they, like, abduct you." And I remember being like, "What do you mean? Like, what is that?"
What?
Like, asking my,
Yeah.
other staff person, then, like, telling me and some of the residents about, yeah, like, a lot of the programs out west, they had said, like, you and they're not all out west, but, like, you they just come to your house in the middle of the night, like, can handcuff you, can, like, be really scary as your parents are, like, watching and not doing anything, and, like, that piece of it when
I
she had
don't
called,
understand.
the at the end when she was kind of calling one of those
Yes.
programs that
Yes.
ironically the state
The
pays
state would
for.
pay for, right?
So it's like the most vulnerable population are foster youth, like,
Uh-huh.
period. Like, that's,
Period. End
we've
of
studied that.
story.
And for them to be put in these programs where the state is paying for it and they are being abducted, I that
I
made
can't
me
believe it.
feel so, like, I wanted to throw up.
I cannot believe it. The state won't pay for like, like outpatient treatment, but we'll pay for that. Oh my gosh, Portia. I mean, I think this just so highlights something so necessary that I don't know if the average person knows about this going on. But like, I remember when I was on my inpatient psychiatry rotations, like sometimes, and I still hear about this, like when I'm getting, referrals for private practice about people now in adulthood who were like, yeah, I was sent to one of these programs. Or sometimes, like, I'm hearing more about like these quote unquote wilderness programs where maybe you're not abducted, but you're like out in the middle of nowhere just to survive. And I'm just like, who thought any of this was a good idea? Who thought that like abducting you was gonna like scare you straight? But I guess back then that was like in the ether, like this whole like notion about like let's scare it out of you.
Well, and
I don't
still,
get
I mean,
it.
it's like the attack therapy, which,
Ugh.
was is not effective, is not evidence-based. We know does more harm than good. It's just it's really bad.
Yeah, but I'm just like, even, this reminded me a lot of the Paris Hilton documentary that came out
Yes.
several years ago. And again, I'm just like, in awe of Paris Hilton being so open and honest about her experience. Say what you will of her otherwise, but like that takes so much bravery. And to now be using your voice or your power for
Mm.
good
Right.
is like, I think really admirable. I don't think we can emphasize enough how hard it is to talk openly about trauma when you've been
Yeah.
through it. Like, I have patients in one-on-one sessions who really struggle, and that's a lot of the early work is just validating, like, yeah, this is hard because it never should have happened to you, you know? And so I can't imagine, like, putting out a documentary or being open about something on such, like, a wide
Mhm.
scale. And I just really hope everyone's okay who, put themselves out there. But,
Right.
I hope a lot of good comes from it because, like, I don't understand how these schools or whatever you wanna call it, like, exist.
And some of them, like, are not okay, you know? I mean, they talked about the end, which is just tragic, like, knowing so many people that personally that they were in programming with who are, have lost their life, whether to addiction or, suicide, and
Suicide, right.
you've gotta make the connection that, like, these programs like, are
Traumatizing.
traumatizing almost, like, at best. I don't know what's
Right.
worse, but, like, it's, like, traumatizing at best to at such a critical time, and I think that that's what they were really highlighting. So, like, so the troubled teen industry, like, I think gets so much of its power because it's teens, because these are
Yeah.
people without rights that parents
Yes.
can kind of sign over, your where you live and, like, all of your autonomy and all of your choices to a program that seems that, like, it's gonna help. So, like, there's
Right.
the therapeutic boarding schools, the wilderness programs, the residential treatment centers, like, the fact that they're so unregulated, I thought is just part of the wild
Scary.
part that I don't understand.
And, like, how? Yeah. How? But I think even, like, on a way smaller scale, even thinking about, like, when you're deciding, like, what kind of school to send your child to, like, private schools versus public schools versus charter schools versus magnet schools, there's, like, so many schools. And you have to be, like, really diligent about making
Mhm.
sure, the teachers and stuff are qualified. Because I think unless you're like, if you're outside of the public school, which is more regulated, at least in America, you just got to be really careful about stuff like that. And so I just thought this documentary highlighted like how manipulative the marketing was and things
Yes.
like that. And I just thought the whole depiction of Catherine talking about this with her father
Mm.
and talking about her experience toward him and how she had to sort of like cut him out for a bit of time to heal in order to come back, and how she really just wanted him to see what she went through and believe her was so sad but powerful. And I think it also speaks to like how parents get duped.
There's nothing worse than, I think, somebody not believing you. Like, and
Oh,
obviously there's a lot of worse things, but, like, that when you have this truth that something is happening and the people around you don't believe you, so there's no change, I feel like
oh,
that is can be at times, like, almost worse
the
than the
worst.
actual abuse. We know that, like, with at least treating specifically sexual assault, it's like you can experience, a sexual assault, and what's almost more important is what happens after, is, like, how
Mm,
people respond to you. Was it validated? Do you have a support system? At kind of, if you are able to kind of, like, move through the trauma, and
mhm,
be okay, versus, like, "Oh, we don't
mhm,
believe you. No, this didn't happen. It's your fault." It's like that
mhm,
adds to the damage of the
100%,
event that was already damaging. So I think that
100%.
extra piece, and the lying, like, not like about her drug test, that the one of the
Oh,
other people on it, right? Like, and the
oh,
things that people will do, the coercion, we know this I was thinking of the Stanford prison experiment,
me
like, the
too.
entire
Me
time I was
too.
watching this, because I
Me
think
too.
there's probably a lot of staff who work these programs who I don't think are, like, sociopathic, no empathy, want to hurt kids. There are some, but I
Mhm.
think it's just that
You get,
what
like, caught up
happens.
in it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I think, like, I don't know about you, but I feel like I can remember certain instances where I would see, like, hospital staff
Mhm.
getting caught up in unhealthy dynamics. And, like, again,
Like
like, you're
power
dealing
struggles.
yeah, and you're dealing with really, like, troubled people a lot of times. And a lot of times that's what we talk about. We use fancy psychology words like transference, countertransference, and stuff like that, to really stay in touch with like your reaction to someone who you're trying to help, who's making it hard for whatever the reason. Like you have to be aware of that, but you also have to be in an environment that is safe and promotes being aware of that, doesn't like foster all this ickiness, all
Right.
this abuse, right? Like I thought the scenes where they called or visited people who had worked at the program were really powerful. And again, I was like, wow, it's not often that you get to come back and confront your abuser and like point out that what they did was wrong. And even like when they were, at the karaoke bar,
Oh my gosh, yes.
even getting to like now put him on blast has got to feel good to them.
I know. I mean, like, I thought it was so interesting some of the people that could kind of hear what they were saying,
Mhm.
kind of take
To a
accountability.
point.
I think
Right.
it's like for me, those people feel like more typical people who like it's almost like they can't maybe tolerate like no so they're gonna get defensive like no because they can't tolerate like thinking that they're a bad person versus like
Yeah.
the guy who like created this just being so almost to the point of like delusion that I'm hurting people. It's like we're the best, we're helping all these kids, the having his son. I know we're like skipping around a lot, but at the end, the last
Yeah.
episode where they interviewed um the son of what was his name? Navarre's son, who like doesn't talk to his family anymore because he
Right.
thinks
Right.
it's sick.
Awful.
And
Right.
how
Right.
his dad, he said, like it sounds like is experiencing some sort of like personality disorder with like the mask. And I think he talked about that a lot.
Mhm.
Like he's one way to other people, when he's putting on a
Different
show,
way
and
at
then
home.
he's another way at
Right.
home.
Right. And
But
so I think those are the types of people who are at the top of
mhm.
organizations and cults.
Yep.
Like we talked about in prior episodes, I'm thinking like Yellow Jackets or our episodes about the two cult documentaries back in January. Those people with narcissistic, sociopathic traits, again, not diagnosing anyone in particular, but, research shows
Yep.
that those types of people tend to ascend to the top of organizations like this. And then it's people who are vulnerable to that
Mhm.
manipulation. Like even this person, the son, it was his dad. Like he really didn't have a choice at first until he was old enough to leave.
Yeah.
um or other people, like they said, like a lot of these organizations pop up in really remote areas where
Mhm.
there's not a lot of economy, so then like the community is probably more financially strapped and might
Yep.
need a job, and they might know that, they probably do, and take advantage of that, and become like the booming industry
Mhm.
in that part of the state. That's all manipulative, that's all
Yeah.
done purposefully. And again, we just saw how even like the photographer for the marketing materials kind of knew what was up. And it's just like, oh my God, all these people feeling these vulnerable kids. And you're right, they're so vulnerable because they're kids. And I just think, like, again, if this can happen to Paris Hilton,
Mm.
whose parents are the Hiltons, so you would think would have access to whatever treatment available, like it could happen to anyone,
Right. And a
right?
lot of the
Like,
time in the more like 2000s, 2000s, 10s, 90s, like these programs, I don't think at the time had like figured out state pay, insurance stuff. So it's like their
mhm.
target
Yeah,
is middle class and upper class families. So it's like they
right.
have to sell the
Mhm.
photos, the education, the care as like really
Mhm.
great.
Mhm,
Because
mhm.
that's what like I don't
That's how
know,
you're gonna
like
pay.
that's how you're gonna pay if you're paying for this and the
Right.
thousands of dollars that are
Ugh,
not making their way down to the
the
youth
kids.
with
Right.
food, with accommodations, with licensed certified staff, with
Education,
th-
certificate.
I know. I mean, that's where I thought was to me the biggest question that you can ask and you should ask if you are looking at higher levels of care to send someone away is like, what do the staff look like? What are their license types?
Credentials. But
Um,
also it's like, how does a regular run of the
I
mill
know,
layperson know what are good
I
credentials?
know.
You know?
'Cause they
How
didn't
do you
have
judge
any.
that?
I mean, like, even starting the man at the end who says, "I didn't have a college degree," at like, kind of, like, snipping at, like, "Oh, it's not like I had a college degree or anything, I'm just, like, really good with kids." It's like, that's fine for, like,
A
babysitting
babysitter?
or, like,
Yeah,
doing,
maybe.
like, there's a lot of jobs where you maybe don't
Camp
need anything,
counselor?
associate's degree, bachelor's degree that you can work with children, like, in some capacity. You are typically, though, not in a leadership role starting a program. Like,
Right,
that's just
right,
how it is.
right, and for good reason,
Mhm.
and there's typically, like, background checks, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and also I think the biggest red flag was that the parents could not communicate with the kids
Correct.
directly. That's a huge red flag, and I even, like I think sometimes, like, moving through the world as a psychiatrist parent is hard because 'cause I'm, like, always on alert for predators, just I
Mhm.
think I've, like, just, you know, internalized some really awful traumatic things I've borne witness to. Um, but, like, that is always a red flag, whether it's, like, a teacher, a coach, a babysitter, an organization. If someone is getting in between your ability to communicate with your child or keeping you out of the room in discussions with your child, that's a big red flag.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
would
yeah.
not proceed further with whoever that is. I feel like
Mhm.
that's a dangerous person, and you don't need to figure it out why, just back away.
Yeah. And
But
I
I
think
think,
that's
like yeah.
hard with, like, the I guess, like, the line, and I think that we can do better everywhere, always. Like, I think, we just can. We can always do better. So,
Mhm,
with that being said, me thinking about, like, some residential programs that I know have been therapeutic, that I know are run by licensed professionals of all sorts,
mhm,
it's like some of it I can see where it's easy to manipulate because, like, okay, you're not allowed to contact people for, like, the first 24 hours, or
right,
you can only contact people at call time, between, like that's
right.
really common in a lot of places,
That's really
between, like,
common.
7 and 9 or something like
Right,
so, like, that's usually more typical. I think that there's an explanation for that with, like, really wanting not outside stressors and influences to impact treatment, especially if you are at
right.
a higher level of care. You
Mhm.
typically are experiencing a significant mental health amount of symptoms. I would say your functioning
Yeah,
is low. So, like, if you are at a place and mom's really triggering, like, it's not helpful for you to talk to mom all throughout the day.
yeah,
So, like,
right,
that's where there's that back and forth. But again, it's I think that can be explained well, and it still should be very frequent, or they should be having family sessions, which they do with the
right,
program I'm thinking of, like, twice a week, where it's
right.
like, so that just being said, I think it's
Yeah, no,
wild
that's a good
that
point.
people had to wait sometimes, like, months
Months,
to
that's what
talk
I
to
mean,
their
yeah.
parent, like that, and some of the stays, like, that is not that's where, at least in the United States, I know in Europe it's different, there can be long stays in patient care or
Mhm,
higher levels of care, but, like, a typical stay for a residential program with either private pay or insurance, like, typical is probably, like, 30 days, 30 to 60
mhm,
days.
right.
Almost 3 years, 2.5 years is
Unreal,
unheard of. I
unreal.
think the longest time I've ever heard of someone going to a real place is, like, 10 months, and because there was, like, a
Mhm.
medical complexity part
Right,
that was not
right,
improving.
right, right, right,
Um,
right.
but otherwise, like, that's to take so much time from youth to think about that developmental phase that you are in
Oh,
is so cruel
it's
and
so cruel. It's
abusive.
sadistic. It's
Mhm.
awful. Like, there's no other words to describe it. It is there's a place in hell for these people.
Mhm.
Like, I don't understand how this can just go on. Like, I think you looked up some stats, Portia, 150,000 children are sent to facilities like this every year. 150,000. 150 a year. Like, I can't like, my heart can't take that. I
No.
just I can't believe it, and I mean, again, like, all of the women and men and people in this documentary, like, I wanna give a big hug to, and, like, they were so brave to talk so openly about their experiences. Um, I can't believe humans do this to each other, let alone children who are so vulnerable. It just like makes me so angry. And I know we've talked about this before offline of like the kids who need the most nurturing get put in these programs. You know, the kids who are like externalizing, running away, using drugs, like are have like quote unquote hard behaviors. Like they need the very opposite of this.
Right.
You know, like this is exactly what they don't need. You know, like why as a society have we not done something good to help these people? Like, well, I don't get it. I can't wrap my head around it.
And even thinking back to the episode we did on Shutter Island with Dr. Wasser,
Mhm.
we talked about the overall, which is kind of inverse to this, but like the deinstitutionalization of
Yeah.
people. And
Mhm.
the idea was to create more community supports.
Right.
So
More
in this
outpatient
way, it's like the
centers and
troubled
stuff.
teen, industry did the opposite, which is
Right.
interesting, like at the same time that this was
At the same
happening.
time. Yeah, that's
But
so true.
what is so important is like it's not set up, and I know that, like that's a fact, but like the best place for a teen to be is in their community. Like with their supports, and maybe there aren't supports. Like maybe that's a part of the problem, but like
Mhm.
we need to get them supports, like some kind of
Yeah.
trusted adult, whether it's at school, and just being around people. To me, one of the things that made me just so upset was like not being able to talk. So you're
Oh,
taking people at this developmental time when interacting with others, with that's how you learn about the world, is through peer-to-peer interactions. It's vital at
I
this
mean,
time.
we all saw how harmful it was in COVID to not see each other, to not be able to talk, to when we went back to school to wear
Right,
masks. Like that is like that was so traumatizing, but what these kids went through
right.
and I still go through in some of these awful places is so much worse. I cannot in what world is that therapeutic? Like I don't understand Portia. Like in what world is that therapeutic? That you
I
come, you
know.
can't talk, you can't look at people, you can't do anything. It isn't. It's just meant to control you. It's so sick. It is so sick.
And
And they I
they
mean,
they kept talking about how a lot of the seminars like were set up to break you. And I think it's like I would
to
like
brainwash you.
to really put emphasis on the word seminars. It was not group therapy. It was
No,
not therapy of any sort. It was like
it was
this
not
thing that they called
school.
it. So I think that's even so interesting. Like as a
The
parent,
language you
and you
use.
wouldn't even like again, many people would not know this. Many people would not think to ask this, but like, oh yeah, we have these seminars. It's like, what does that mean? Like, what is a
Right.
seminar? It's basically
Right.
just people like talking. Like anyone can have a
Right.
seminar. It's not therapy.
Yeah. And again, like on a typical like inpatient unit or residential unit, um, the language we use is, usually you're going to have throughout your day a mix of therapeutic programming like individual therapy, group therapy, skills based work, art therapy. You get
Hmm.
time outdoors, you get food. Like that's what we're talking about. And you can ask, like, well, what kind of therapy? It's really important. It's trauma informed.
Yep.
If your teen has any history of trauma, you might get CBT, cognitive behavioral
Hmm.
therapy, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. There might be some medication management. As the parent, you should always be asked and provide consent before your child takes medication. I don't know how they got around that in these facilities. Like, I just
I
don't
They
know.
must be signing over parental
But at least in
rights, right?
Connecticut, they must be because, like, in Connecticut, for every decision going up on the dose, you call and get the parents' permission. For giving them Tylenol, you call and give it's not like a carte blanche blanket. Yes, give my kid meds, you
And
know?
I don't know this. This was not a part of my role. So when I worked in the residential place, I hadn't gone back to grad school, so I had my bachelor's degree, and I got certified through this like 3-day class to like pass meds, so like it's you
Mm,
learn how to do it, you learn how to document it, like you
mhm.
get the keys,
Yeah,
it's you're liable, I'm liable for med errors, you report
right.
if you make a med error, all that stuff. But like it's funny that you say that because I don't know, like, it seems like it happened quickly, and I'm not s like, they probably did call, but, like, I wasn't a part of that. I had no
Mm,
idea if they were calling or not, and, like, you get new meds the next day, and, like, I guess parents were answering quickly? I don't know.
yeah, I don't know either.
But you also have, like, what's hard to talk about is the students who, or the youth, the poor teens who broke out and went to jail temporarily, them
Oh,
talking about how jail was so
that
much
was
better.
better.
And that I find so telling and
Telling.
interesting. And because I feel like in jail, things are, and I'm not saying that jail is a nice place by any means, but like it's predictable. You are
3 hots in a
also
cot.
like told about what's happening. You know what I mean? And like
Mhm.
I know that
You
sometimes you're
have
not, but like
but you do have some basic rights,
right.
right? Like,
Even in
you get
jail.
meals. Yes. Whereas at these freaking institutions, whatever you wanna call it, they have no rights.
Right.
They're like I mean, they would say they would be kept in those rooms for just hours, days, have to look at the same like, this is torture.
Mhm.
Like, this is, like, probably what the military does to, like, terrorists. I don't know, Portia. Like, this is just I couldn't I just awful. Just awful. Even, like, coming in, like, the strip searches, like, the sexual assault, the isolation, the seclusion, the predatory behavior of some of the staff on the young girls, like, that I'm her name is escaping me right now, but, that one girl who was talking about, like, the teacher who she formed that bond with,
Yes.
and then she saw the teacher,
Yep.
like, giving attention to someone like, just all the grooming behaviors were so sickening to
Yep.
me, and I thought that individual in particular perfectly described,
Mhm.
"This is what grooming is, this is how it affects someone, and these are the psychological ramifications,"
Yep.
and I was so proud of her for being able now to say it.
Mhm.
I just I'm honestly blown away by their strength. And I really I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, with that being said, like I've never conducted a part of the intake because it was an all boys program. So I was never the
Mhm.
one to do because I was a girl. I was
Mhm.
never in the room with them. The strip searches were not, they didn't sound like this. Like they just had to like get to their
Right.
underwear. It was underwear. It was in a bathroom. The staff would knock, come in, come out. Like we'd search the bathroom before and after. So there's so many ways that you can make a
And
very
again, it's like
terrible thing, which like an
less
uncomfortable thing,
terrible. Yeah.
like not like predatory, you know?
Right,
Like it's
exactly.
still not
Right.
great.
Right. And again, it's like in these programs they do stuff like that. Um again because like you have to like make sure there's no weapons or no
Mhm.
drugs or like there's reasons that there are protocols for things like this, but there are usually evidence-based protocols. And it's not meant to
And like
like you
consent,
said, be
like
predatory. Yes,
explaining like this is what's
consent.
going to happen. This is part of the intake process. Like, and typically, at least for us, this all happened while the parents were still there, like within the
Mhm.
whole
Right.
day. So like they would
Mhm.
be, we'd take their belongings and we would wash them, really just for
Yeah.
bugs or bringing anything in. Um, we'd like, search their bag and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Wash their clothing items, and then they'd like return back with the parents. All it was all observed,
Right,
and
I'm sure if a parent said, "Can I stay in the room while you search him?" I'm sure you'd say, "Of course."
yeah, right,
You wouldn't be like, "No, get out of
right.
here." Um, yeah, but, I think it does raise good questions about, like, restraints. They did talk about restraints quite a bit in this documentary. And I think for me in my training, like, a lot of this, like, restraints in particular, I feel like I had a really hard time with, like,
Mhm,
obviously, because 'cause I'm not, like, a sociopath, as confirmed by Dr. Z.
mhm.
But, like, I don't
I will
know.
say that there were fights, and there was never once a restraint used in the way that we were taught. And
Mm,
I mean that in a good way. Like I think there's no reason, and I know that I'm sure like there are in some unique or situations, but even if there were fights, we were always able to separate the people in the fights by just like pressing someone out the door and then getting them out of the building, taking them for a walk. Like we are not
mhm.
I'd say we're not doing holds. Like
Like we
holds
saw on the
can
videos
be
that
deadly,
and they
and
yes,
are deadly.
right.
So that's where it's just like, there's no reason that you need to be holding it, a teen,
especially a
a young
child.
person in a hold
Right.
for minutes. There's no reason to
No
ever be
way.
doing that. Ever.
And the right,
Ever,
and I'm
ever,
thinking
ever.
about the part in this documentary where all the other kids are just eating their lunch because 'cause they're not
I
phased.
know.
That was so sad to me.
I
It's just
know.
devastating,
And
just
you see the
devastating.
staff, like, they're not in one of the videos where you see the male, he's like sweeping, it's in the hallway, and you see him like keep kind of turning to the staff, and then you see him finally like throw the broom down and like walk towards the staff. It's like, I will bet my life that that staff member was
Was doing
being
something, was
like
provoking him,
provoking,
saying something.
saying things just to get, a rise out of him. Like, and that's how you avoid that. Like, if you
Right,
respect the patients, yes,
right,
I'm still an authority figure. Like, I just am. I'm a staff. I get to leave, but I
right.
respect you. You can typically, I'd say like 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10,
De-escalate.
de-escalate and not you have
Right,
to use a restraint or ever a hold.
right,
Like, period. The
right.
amount of deaths by restraint, which I would say like it's a hold, because a restraint, I'd say it's like a stop. A hold is like minutes, like a length of
Yeah.
time, is so high. I mean, it seems like it's restraint and then like neglect, almost like medical neglect, like a drowning,
Yes.
someone's, illness not being treated. Like, it's like those two
Right.
things seem to be the highest cause of death in these programs, and that is unacceptable. Like
Unacceptable.
zero. Those should be
First of all,
zero.
like, none of these programs should exist. Like, all the money we're spending on these programs, like, let's actually make some good
Mhm.
programs. I don't understand. Probably because 'cause they're all for profit,
Oh, yeah.
right? But, like, how is this there's so many layers to this that are astounding and devastating and awful, and it's so sad because there's so many providers out there who want to help and, like, struggle to get the money to do
Mhm.
it, right? Because, like, we don't invest in mental health treatment in this country the way we should, and, like, I just don't understand. I feel like this is, like, really shining a light on some of the worst parts of humanity ever,
Mhm. I just can't
ever.
believe that it's current. Like, if this
I can't
had
believe it's
been,
still going on,
in the 90s, like, okay, like, that was terrible and we're better now, but, like, the fact that they
but we're
have
not,
found ways over and over and over again to, like,
to do
re-enter
this.
this space.
How exactly, like, how is this not criminal? And also, like, with this school in particular, they left all the documents there.
I mean, that's a HIPAA
Who thought that was
violation,
the
which is, I think, easy
first
to, like, prove. Like, it's like a HIPAA
proof?
violation.
But also, so there's all the evidence of a, like, horrible abuse. Like, how can you not prosecute these
I
people?
don't know.
And again, like that one individual who has like the storage units on their property, who's been organizing it all these years to give back to people. Like, you are an angel walking on the earth, right? Like, I just am so astounded by all of the people who put this together. And I really applaud them, and I worry about them. I hope they're okay. I hope they have good therapists now. I think this will do a lot of good. I think, like, it also does raise the question of, like, you know, putting this stuff out there, like in documentaries, or I'm thinking more so like when I have patients who've been through something traumatic and now they're involved in a lawsuit about it, how it can be so re-traumatizing, especially like you were saying, that invalidation piece, if the other people in the system,
Mhm.
whether it's like the filmmaking system or the legal system, are not trauma informed and aren't like going about it
Right.
in a thoughtful way, which, at least in my experience with the legal system, they're often not. Their like goal is so different. And it's I just worry when I see stuff like this too. Like, I just hope that they're all like okay, or have enough support to support them,
I mean, the
coming out with
education
this stuff.
piece, I feel like might even be the best way to start, because like, I know thought it was funny that they, like, compared it to, the Trump
Oh
university,
my
and,
god.
like, that
Yeah.
would like, that was sued, right? So it's like, if
Right.
these students graduated, quoting, air quoting,
And they
um,
don't even have a
and it's
GED,
not
like,
right, it's
oh
not a
my god.
certified, like, that to me seems like an easy lawsuit.
Right, or the HIPAA that's what I'm saying. So are these people just so powerful they can't be touched?
It seemed that way with them then talking about, like, the funders of campaigns and,
Right.
just, like, why some acts haven't been passed. Like, there's, like, the Child Protection Act that, like, one of them, like, was in I think they were referencing like a 2005 one. Another one is more recent that I know Paris Hilton has done a lot of
Yeah.
work, real work,
Yeah.
like talking to
Right. And that's
legislators
where I'm like,
back and forth
God
to
bless her,
pass this.
honestly, because like using your position of power and influence to be able to like help spearhead
Mhm.
this, like, thank God. I can't believe this is real.
I wanna know why that guy on, I don't know if it was episode 2 or 3, but he had been interviewed, like, on, a national, like, news agency story, whatever, journalist, about how he still thinks they're good. And then, like halfway through the interview, he was like, "Oh, this isn't the interview I thought it would be." I want to be like, how are you connected to this and profiting out of it? Because like there's a
Mhm.
way. Like
Right.
period. There's no
Yes.
way. And then the referral sources I thought was so fascinating. So if you referred someone, you got like $5,000 off, your next month or something like that. Like
Mhm.
that doesn't
But like,
happen in with places that I know. Like
well,
all of
so
the
but
treatment centers
but
I'm thinking of.
well, so good quality treatment centers it doesn't, but nefarious, shady treatment centers
Yes.
it does. Like I'm thinking about all the rehabs in Florida.
Mhm.
There's like this whole ring of
Yes.
nefarious rehabs where like you go to rehab, but then they like get you hooked again.
All
So then
the
you go to
lab
the detox center,
testing, they like
all
triple bill
that
for.
stuff.
Mhm.
But it's just like it makes me so sad. I can't. I mean, like I'm just like a broken record at this point. But like, how do you treat people like this? Like, how do you have a conscience? Maybe they just don't.
I've got to say that the people at the top don't. Um just because of the like financial incentive, I think like that's what it is. I mean, I think that
Right.
you'd have to be pretty like delusional
Sociopathic. Yeah.
to be able to not see that or to see it and still feel that way anyway. I mean, it seems like all of the treatments and this whole idea like came from a cult,
Mhm.
Synanon, which we
Mhm.
you learn through this documentary.
Mhm.
But
And they show you like the girls doing the hand gestures
yep,
and stuff, which is like
yes,
that's what they were doing in seminars. It's just weird.
right,
Or like how physically drained they would get. Like this is
mm-hmm,
all cult stuff.
right.
This is all weird freaky cult stuff.
And I think that
Um
that sometimes I would imagine people being like, "Oh, a cult, like that doesn't like, it's like a therapeutic school, like it's bad, but like, how is it a cult?" And it's like because they're doing these cult-like practices and have taken
yeah.
how they manipulate people and how they break you down to build you up to not be you. But then we learn that all of these teens, a lot of them are like faking it. And that one person who
That
I
one girl who refused, right? And
yes,
they were always trying to break her.
I know, that was sad, and she like, that to me, I liked how they said, like, the artists or, the free thinkers, like,
Yes.
that's okay to not, like.
That's so true though.
So I'm thinking of the woman who was talking about how she has so much guilt for kind of, like,
Mm.
becoming them, like, in the higher
Yes.
levels, and how she's like, "I did stuff to kids, like, I, like, would write them up, or I would, I, like,
But that
would
is also
restrain."
part of the cult.
Exactly,
And that's meant to
exactly.
keep all of them under control. We see that time and again.
Yep,
I'm thinking about
exactly.
the cult documentaries that we
Yep.
talked about in January. Same thing.
Mhm.
Kylie was her name.
Yep.
Again, same thing. That's how the people at the top keep everyone
Yep.
under control as you start to turn those people against each
Mhm.
other. Well, to try to end on a positive note, I did think that speaking of humanity, as heartbreaking and awful as all of this is to witness, witnessing Catherine be able to talk to her father and witnessing his reaction and ability to hear her, I was really touched by that.
Yeah.
I was really moved by it. I was like, this is what parents need to do. As hard as it is, you just need to listen
And
and
keep
not
listening.
keep listening. And it felt like even when she cut him off for a year or two or however long it was, it's like I feel like they would write to each other and it wasn't easy. Remember, like she said,
Mhm.
like he kept sort of defending, and I think that's such a common defense mechanism.
Right.
Because you just can't even grapple or sit
Right.
with like the fact that you could have let this happen or
Exactly.
contributed in some way. But eventually he got there. At least we saw him like come and listen
Mhm.
to her and apologize and validate what she went through and say like I want to oh, move for I just that I really was moved by that.
Mm.
I really was, and I feel like I don't know how often that actually happens or if it would have happened without the documentary
Right.
and all the evidence, like, in your face.
It's so hard working with teens, and I guess it's and it's so hard, I would imagine, being a parent to a teen because
Mhm.
you're so worried about them. You love them so much. And I'm talking about like good enough good parents. You know,
Mm.
like you love your kid and you want them to succeed and you want them to protect them. And teenhood is so scary because they
Oh.
are starting to push away. They're starting to take risks and figure out things. And a part of that truly, and I know that there's a line, like there's a spectrum of this, but like a part of this is like having natural consequences. And
Yeah.
I think
Within
like
reason.
what we've learned from this is like these programs
These
are worse than jail. So like
Yeah. These are unnatural
yeah,
consequences.
like teens are
And
dying
for
here and that's
right.
not okay. So
That's not
don't
what
send
we
your kid
mean.
here.
Right. Oh. Wow. So this was again a hard documentary to watch, but again, if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to. If you feel up for it, if it's too triggering, get I get it,
Mhm.
like it's important to know your own limits, but again, I don't think as two mental health professionals we can say enough just like how commendable this is to put out there. Um, we believe everyone in what they were saying, and I want to keep track of sort of what happens next,
Yeah.
and if any justice comes from it, I hope so. And I hope that we as a society can really like think in bigger ways about how are we treating the most vulnerable members of our society and like why can't we do better?
Mhm. Yeah, and how can we, especially as professionals in the mental health field, like support survivors from this
Yeah.
and
Right.
that can be any, and you don't have to be obviously a mental health professional, but like that means writing to your legislator, in support of
Right.
bills that come up. It means, kind of doing all sorts of advocacy works. It means, sharing stories if you feel inclined to. It means, promoting the dissolution of these programs. So there's so much to do. I feel like it can
Yeah.
feel overwhelming that there isn't that because it's
Right.
so
Big.
horrible and
And you're
big,
bumping
but
up against a huge system.
exactly.
Yeah.
But
But
there are
everyone
things
can
we
do
can do.
something.
Mhm.
Right, exactly. Everyone can do something, and that's how the tides will turn, even if it's just listening
Mhm.
and taking it in and believing,
Yeah.
someone when they're telling you what they went through.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to, this more really important information but challenging episode. There's tons
Mhm.
of people to share out there. I mean, you can Google troubled teen industry. You can search it on TikTok. You'll see people who talk about their stories. Some of the content, of course, is triggering. You can also, support Paris Hilton and some of her
Yeah.
legislative work. And thanks for joining us today. And as always, feel free to follow us and like us and subscribe to us on Instagram, TikTok, and excuse me, our
YouTube.
podcasts and YouTube.
Yeah.
And we are excited to see you next time. As always, thanks for listening.
All right, and next time we're talking about Moana, so it'll be a little lighter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Enjoy. That was good.